Ask yourselves, what is wrong with spending eternity in hell? Well, I'm told it's rather hot there, for one. Dr. Craig is not offering an alternative view of morality. Okay, the whole point of Christianity, or so it is imagined, is to safeguard the eternal well-being of human souls. Now, happily, there's absolutely no evidence that the Christian hell exists. Okay, and I think we should look at the consequences of believing in this framework, this theistic framework, in this world, and what these moral underpinnings actually would be. All right. 9 million children die every year before they reach the age of 5. Okay, picture an Asian tsunami of the sort we saw in 2004 that killed 250,000 people. One of those every 10 days, killing children only under 5. Okay, it's 24,000 children a day, 1,000 an hour, 17 or so a minute. That means before I can get to the end of this sentence, some few children, very likely, will have died in terror and agony. Okay, think of the parents of these children. Think of the fact that most of these men and women believe in God and are praying at this moment for their children to be spared. And their prayers will not be answered. Okay, but according to Dr. Craig, this is all part of God's plan. Any God who would allow children by the millions to suffer and die in this way, and their parents to grieve in this way, either can do nothing to help them or doesn't care to. He is therefore either impotent or evil. And worse than that, on Dr. Craig's view, most of these people, many of these people certainly, will be going to hell because they're praying to the wrong God. Just think about that. Okay, through no fault of their own, they were born into the wrong culture where they got the wrong theology and they missed the revelation. Okay, there are 1.2 billion people in India at this moment. Most of them are Hindus, most of them therefore polytheists. Okay, in Dr. Craig's universe, no matter how good these people are, they are doomed. If you are praying to the monkey god Hanuman, you are doomed. Okay. You will be tortured in hell for eternity. Now, is there the slightest evidence for this? No. It just says so in Mark 9 and Matthew 13 and Revelation 14. Okay. Perhaps you'll remember from the Lord of the Rings, it says when the elves die, they go to Valinor, but they can be reborn in Middle-earth. I say that just as a point of comparison. Okay. So God created the cultural isolation of the Hindus. Okay. He engineered the circumstance of their deaths in ignorance of revelation.
I mean, it's fascinating always when you talk to people who aren't religious or who disparage the Judeo-Christian tradition upon which this entire culture was built, and they'll use Judeo-Christian terms, right? They'll use Judeo-Christian definitions of good and evil. They'll use Judeo-Christian notions of rights that don't exist in the absence of Judeo-Christian culture, right? They don't exist anywhere else on planet Earth for all time. Right. And you know, the idea that you haven't really thought these things through. It's dangerous. I mean, every political philosophy is based on a certain conception of human nature and humanity's place in the world and human value more than anything else. I mean, the foundational statement for all of Western civilization is the very beginning of Genesis that God is made in man, that man is made in God's image. Right. Once you do that, you can talk about the value of man, the rights of man, what is man put here to do. But if you don't believe any of that, if you just believe that man is sort of a random assemblage of atoms that happened along, you know, because the universe is random and there are lots of iterations of it, then I find a hard time making the moral argument against, for example, things like slavery or abortion or tyranny or murder even. I mean, like...
Or capital punishment on the flip side.
Capital punishment. I mean, if you are basically just an ant, unless you're a Jainist and you believe all forms of life should equally be protected, but that's a religion too. If you believe like a secular version of that, then okay, I guess I buy it. But otherwise, you have to explain what makes human beings special and why is that specialness worthy of protection.
It does lead to this what it seems to me disingenuous determinism. That seems to be the logical conclusion of that materialist thinking. But
and disingenuous is the right word, because I think that what ends up happening, it's very weird, is when you talk to a lot of people who are atheists. Like I read Sam Harris's books, and I've met Sam, and I think Sam's a smart guy. And when I read what Sam has to say, a lot of what he has to say is based on just an assumption of free will. There's an assumption that you can choose otherwise, that you are in control of your own life, and that you should live a moral life, that he has constructed for you his version of what morality looks like. Alan Dershowitz sort of has a similar model. And the problem is, where are you getting this free will stuff in a materialistic universe in which you're just a random assemblage of atoms? Like, where is this free will coming from? Where do you get that? And how do you square that with a materialist version of reality? You know, I think that the best proof of God, I've always said this, I think the best proof of God to me is sort of a Cartesian notion that you are a thinker, you are a being.
I can
that
acknowledge myself.
Right. You are a self, right? You're not just a random assemblage of stuff that wakes up new every morning, and that if you have a hamburger, you're a different person than you were 1 minute before because you just put some new stuff in your body, right? The notion that you are a coherent human being with the capacity to think and the capacity to control your behavior and the capacity to change, that's the basis of all of civilization. You take away that basic Augustinian notion of free will, and it's all over.
I couldn't agree more.
And then he created the penalty for this ignorance, which is an eternity of conscious torment in fire. Okay, on the other hand, on Dr. Craig's account, your run-of-the-mill serial killer in America, okay, who spent his life raping and torturing children, need only come to God, come to Jesus on death row, and after a final meal of fried chicken, he's going to spend an eternity in heaven after death. Okay. One thing should be crystal clear to you. This vision of life has absolutely nothing to do with moral accountability. Okay. And please notice the double standard that people like Dr. Craig use to exonerate God from all this evil. Okay. We're told that God is loving and kind and just and intrinsically good. But when someone like myself points out the rather obvious and compelling evidence that God is cruel and unjust because he visits suffering on innocent people of a scope and scale that would embarrass the most ambitious psychopath, okay, we're told that God is mysterious. Okay, who can understand God's will? Okay, and yet this is precisely, this merely human understanding of God's will is precisely what believers use to establish his goodness in the first place. You know, something good happens to a Christian. He feels some bliss while praying, say, or he sees some positive change in his life, and we're told that God is good. Okay, but when children by the tens of thousands are torn from their parents' arms and drowned, we're told that God is mysterious. Okay, this is how you play tennis without the net. Okay, and I want to suggest to you that it is not only tiresome when otherwise intelligent people speak this way, it is morally reprehensible. Okay, this kind of faith is really the perfection of narcissism. I mean, God loves me, don't you know? He cured me of my eczema. He makes me feel so good while singing in church. And just when we had given up hope, he found a banker who was willing to reduce my mother's mortgage. Okay. Given all that this God of yours does not accomplish in the lives of others, given the misery that's being imposed on some helpless child at this instant, this kind of faith is obscene. Okay. To think in this way is to fail to reason honestly or to care sufficiently about the suffering of other human beings. And if God is good and loving and just and kind, and he wanted to guide us morally with a book, why give us a book that supports slavery? Why give us a book that admonishes us to kill people for imaginary crimes like witchcraft? Now, of course, there's a way of not taking these questions to heart. Okay, according to Dr. Craig's divine command theory, God is not bound by moral duties. God doesn't have to be good. Whatever he commands is good. So when he commands that the Israelites to slaughter the Amalekites, that behavior becomes intrinsically good because he commanded it. Okay, well, here we're being offered, I'm glad he raised the issue of psychopathy, we're being offered a psychopathic and psychotic moral attitude. It's psychotic because this is completely delusional. There's no reason to believe that we live in a universe ruled by an invisible monster, Yahweh.
My feeling is that religious liberty is under a definite and growing assault in the United States. And when I say religious liberty is under assault, I don't mean just in terms of people disagreeing. That's not a violation of liberty. That's the exercise of liberty. I'm talking about the intervention of government and the use of government as a weapon against people's religious, not only beliefs, but against people's religious activities. I am befuddled and bewildered and dismayed that we have now become a country where we're all supposed to sit around on Monday and wait for the 9 wisest and most moral among us to descend in their robes and inform us to what extent we're allowed to worship God in our business lives. This is what the threat, I believe, is, and I think that the threat is quite deep. I think what we're going to watch in the next 2 years is states like Washington try to withdraw the nonprofit status of various churches that refuse to perform same-sex marriages. Once those nonprofit status, under the guise of the Bob Jones University decision from the 1980s, and then they will attempt to remove any business license from churches that refuse to perform same-sex marriages. And this will be a tremendous crackdown on religious freedom in America. The argument that's being made in the case is that basically the state can encroach on any religious behavior whatsoever so long as it doesn't encroach on religious opinion. And that's the problem with the case in and of itself. And I think that the point that you're making, Michael, is that people who use this case as a case against the exercise of religious freedom in the public square in terms of action are the same people, in large part, who are saying that the state has no right to regulate, for example, gay marriage, which is a completely illogical position. So you have to believe that either the state has to make provision and make room for religious liberty in exercise, or you have to believe that the state has the power to basically compel whatever behavior it seeks so long as it doesn't affect opinion. The minute that you have the government deciding whose beliefs are deeply held versus what is not deeply held, I mean, that literally is the thought police. I mean, that is the government deciding what's in your head and then guaranteeing you certain rights based on what's in your head. And the bottom line to this entire discussion is really, does the government have the power to regulate your religious behavior if the government feels that it violates its morality?
And I will stand up for what we have built.
But you'll shut down my business if I don't serve a cake to get to a gay couple.
As a great culture with great religious liberty.
But you will shut down my business if I don't serve a cake to a gay wedding.
Pardon me?
But you'll shut down my business if I don't serve a cake to a gay wedding.
I can assure you we'll be getting to shutting down businesses.
Give me an example.
As a result.
Give me an example.
I'll give you an example of
that exact example. This is sort of the point, I think, is that when you look at the word imposition is being thrown around a lot. You know, imposition. That people are imposing their beliefs on others. There's only one group in this country that is using the government to impose their beliefs on others at the point of a gun, and that is not Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby is involved in a consensual relationship between the employer and the employee. Churches are involved in consensual relationships between themselves and their constituents. The government is not involved in a consensual relationship when it tells a business that it will revoke its license and it will come to their front door if they remain open, and it will forcibly shut down their business. There's only one person and one group that is coming to the party here with a gun. And the only group, I mean, you said conservatives love guns. Liberals love guns far more. They just love guns that are being used by the government against conservatives. The reason that I use the gun language is because it is vitally important for people to understand that every government measure at the end of the day it must be compelled by force. That's what government measures are for. There is a vast difference, a huge difference in terms of personal liberty and freedom between the government compelling behavior and a company saying that we are not going to provide certain types of coverage, and if you don't like that, you can quit or buy your own coverage. There's a vast difference. Michael, you went to public school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so did I for elementary school, and I think I was in the Christmas pageant. I believe I was an elf, and somehow I didn't magically turn into a Christian. And my guess is that both you and I could probably sing in beautiful two-part harmony all of Silent Night, probably based on what we learned in public school. The idea that this is some sort of grand imposition or grand inquisition, and that the acting out of the mere saying of the word Christmas in a public school is somehow an establishment of religion to the exclusion of all other religions. Before you warned that perhaps I should take things a little more lightly. On this one, I do take it pretty lightly.
Good.
So yeah, the idea that
I'm proud of you, man.
The idea that religion is being imposed on me by a public school when there is a Christmas pageant I can opt in or out of is if this is as bad as it gets, then I'm willing to live with that.
But it is psychopathic because this is a total detachment from the well-being of human beings. This so easily rationalizes the slaughter of children. Okay, just think about the Muslims at this moment who are blowing themselves up, okay, convinced that they are agents of God's will. There is absolutely nothing that Dr. Craig can say against their behavior in moral terms, apart from his own faith-based claim that they're praying to the wrong God. Okay, if they had the right God, what they were doing would be good on divine command theory. Now, I'm obviously not saying that Dr. Craig or all religious people are psychopaths and psychotics, but this, to me, is the true horror of religion. Okay, it allows perfectly decent and sane people to believe by the billions what only lunatics could believe on their own. Okay, if you wake up tomorrow morning thinking that saying a few Latin words over your pancakes is going to turn them into the body of Elvis Presley, okay, you have lost your mind. Okay. But if you think more or less the same thing about a cracker and the body of Jesus, you're just a Catholic. And I'm not the first person to notice that it's a very strange sort of loving God who would make salvation depend on believing in him on bad evidence. Okay, I mean, if you lived 2,000 years ago, there was evidence galore. I mean, he was just performing miracles. But apparently he got tired of being so helpful. Okay, and so now we all inherit this very heavy burden of the doctrine's implausibility. And the effort to square it with what we now know about the cosmos and what we know about the all-too-human origins of Scripture becomes more and more difficult. Okay, and it's not just the generic God that Dr. Craig is recommending. It is God the Father and Jesus the Son. Okay, Christianity, on Dr. Craig's account, is the true moral wealth of the world. Well, I hate to break it to you here at Notre Dame, but Christianity is a cult of human sacrifice. Okay, Christianity is not a religion that repudiates human sacrifice. It is a religion that celebrates a single human sacrifice as though it were effective. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. John 3:16. Okay, the idea is that Jesus suffered the crucifixion so that none need suffer hell, except that those billions in India and billions like them throughout history. Okay, this is astride. This doctrine is astride a contemptible history of scientific ignorance and religious barbarism. We come from people who used to bury children under the foundations of new buildings as offerings to their imaginary gods. I mean, just think about that. In vast numbers of societies, people would bury children in post holes, people like ourselves thinking that this would prevent an invisible being from knocking down their buildings. Okay. These are the sorts of people who wrote the Bible. Okay. If there is a less moral framework than the one Dr. Craig is proposing, I haven't heard of it.
Sam, there are plenty of things people do that don't make sense, but of course they're otherwise harmless to others and might be mildly harmless to the person who thinks it or believes it, but no one makes a big deal of it. If the religious community, instead of going away, morphed into a systems of philosophy that made no attempt to say things about the physical world that are easily verifiable by the methods and tools of science and rational inquiry. And they only simply talked about, how to treat your neighbor, how to, maybe give you someplace to think you might be when you're dead. What's the harm in that? If we're going to try to be realistic about how effective any such movement that you want to support can be, Either you're going to say one day there are going to be no religions in the world, or one day there's a profile of the various religions that have changed to the point where they don't trigger anybody's reaction, anyone such as your reaction.
Right, right. Well, I'm just not hopeful that they can change. They can be so chaste in their proclamations about reality so as not to conflict with those of us who are trying to speak sensibly about reality and to shape public policy that's based on sensible conversation. So, for instance, what do you do when you find out that your neighbor's religion has proscribed drawing a caricature of a certain historical figure and has prescribed it in such terms that you can get 100,000 people in the town square calling for the deaths of newspaper editors and cartoonists for drawing, for publishing pictures of the Prophet Muhammad? It seems to me that really is a deal breaker. I mean, this is just free speech and rational understandings of civil society just have to win. It's just there's no accommodation with that. What was so scandalous about that episode is that we really caved in. I mean, we practiced self-censorship. We chastised Denmark for publishing those cartoons, and New York Times wrote editorials, about it. And we're not recognizing the bigger picture here, which is this is an eruption of medievalism that is sanctioned by the fastest growing religion in the world. And here again, I'm focusing on Islam almost randomly. I mean, I'm worried about religion in totality, but you have to get, if you're going to dignify the claim that one of our books is not just a book, but is in some sense an infallible document, you are, it seems to me, always going to be held hostage to the contents of the book. And it just so happens that these books are engines of intolerance. I mean, 100 years from now, someone can pick up the Quran or the Bible and find reasons to be every bit as obnoxious as Ted Haggard or worse, and those reasons are continually refreshing themselves. So unless we undercut this notion that the Bible and the Quran are not at all like the plays of Shakespeare, I don't think the problem can go away.
Yeah, I'm going to have to be an engine of intolerance because I'm hostage to time. So.
How much stronger is the religious persecution on leftist campuses?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy to be a religious person on campus. I'll answer the second question first. It's not easy to be a religious person on campuses because you're perceived as stupid. I mean, the nice thing is if you do, once you go to Harvard Law School, they can't say that anymore. But but you get that a lot, right? It's the idea that you're a dummy for believing in religion. And the truth is, all of Western civilization is based on a Judeo-Christian value system. It hasn't sprung up anywhere else. I mean, there are tons of cultures all over the globe, and none of them have the kind of civilization America does. And America, by the way, is still significantly more religious than Europe, which is not coincidentally one of the reasons why we are significantly more powerful than Europe. So, when they say that you're a fool for believing in God, the truth is that belief in God is belief. Right? You have to take a leap of faith. It can't be proved. It can't be something. It's not something that you can make a scientific hypothesis and then fulfill that hypothesis. But atheism can't be proved either. And there's no way to prove these sorts of intangibles. And what that means is that you can either choose to at least acknowledge. What I would say to people is, look, whether you believe in God personally is your own business. It is. I don't really care particularly. As a religious person, I care about your soul. But as a political person, it's your own business. I don't care. But as a society, when we fail to acknowledge the value of Judeo-Christian religion steeped in the idea that every human being has equal worth under God, you end up very quickly devolving into a socialism that ends up demeaning human beings individually. Because there's never been a place on earth that wasn't like that. The fact is that the collective takes over. People worship. People are made to worship. And we will either worship God or we will worship the state. Or we'll worship ourselves. Right? Those tend to be the three choices. You're either a libertine, or you're a communist, or you're a conservative. Those are sort of the three choices. So I think that when it comes to defending religion, it's easier to defend the system of religion than particular religious belief because we all have different religions, we all have different religious beliefs. Even among Orthodox Jews, there's a lot of diversity of each individual has their own relationship with God, and you can't argue anybody else into your relationship with God. What you can say is, here is something that is unquestioned and undoubted. Judeo-Christian religion has created the foundation for the greatest civilization in the history of mankind, and ripping away the foundations of that civilization on behalf of a philosophy that really has never built
anything without those roots in Judeo-Christian. Atheism, modern atheism, has its root in Judeo-Christian religion. It does. It doesn't exist in the Islamic world, right? Modern atheism, the freedom to be an atheist, only exists in the West. It only exists in the Judeo-Christian world. The freedoms that the left bases its whole worldview on are within a milieu that was created by a religion it despises. You can't just take a battering ram to the foundations of civilization and hope the superstructure stands. So that's my answer as far as God.
I'd like to ask you, who or what is God to you?
Who or what is God to me?
Yes, and what role, if any, does that play?
God's my man. I mean, so, you know, it's... the creator of the universe, the master of heaven and earth. You know, who is God to me? God is, you know, as an Orthodox Jew, I believe that God provided us a moral foundation in the Bible, and that moral foundation is, if you live by that moral foundation, you will live a happier, better life, freer of sin. You know, I think that God provides the idea of an objective moral standard that immediately begins to crumble as soon as you get to a subjective idea that everybody can create their own morality. So that's I think, the role of God in society. You know, as far as what is God to me personally, you know, all I can say is that I don't believe in God. I know in God. You know, I don't just have faith in God. I have trust in God. And so that may not end up well for me, because it doesn't always end up well for people with faith. But you know, I think that you know, not recognizing God's providence over the universe, for me particularly, would be an act of tremendous ingratitude.